Hi, it's Martin, and today I would like to talk about someone that most people have never heard about and are not familiar with, and his name is Edward Bernays. He's basically known as the father of propaganda and also public relations. I've basically culled this information from three different sources. One is a Peter Edwards at Global Gypsum. Another one is Marina Dopico with MD Marketing, and a third one is a gentleman by the name of Richard Gunderman. A lot of people have written about him, and there are a number of YouTube videos on him, but for the most part, nobody would even know to go look for him. But it's interesting, so may I begin? Have you ever wondered how we ended up with so much stuff? While many people that have contributed to this, one man arguably had the biggest impact of all on what the world buys and why. Edward Bernays was born in 1891 in Vienna, Austria, but moved to New York as a child at the age of 1. As a young man, he pursued journalism and theater promotion in New York. When the United States joined the First World War in 1917, he joined other publicists at the Committee of Public Information, otherwise known as CPI, generating pro-war propaganda for domestic audiences and promoting the United States abroad. The Committee of Public Information was wildly successful. President Woodrow Wilson was so impressed with Bernays' techniques that he invited him to the Paris Peace Conference in 1918. In Paris, Bernays saw firsthand the power of his propaganda techniques, which had transformed Wilson into a great liberator. His mind was whirling. Could the same techniques be adapted for peacetime? It transpired, yes. Propaganda is very powerful in peacetime, just as long as you don't call it propaganda. After the war, Bernays set up the first public relations agency in New York, boosted by a copy of Psychoanalysis by his uncle Sigmund Freud. I might mention that he was related to Sigmund Freud as his uncle on two accounts. One, his mother was a sister of Sigmund Freud, and his father's sister married Sigmund Freud. He realized that the rational arguments did not win customers. Sellers needed to appeal to their feelings. Before Bernays, marketing was largely based on showing the practical virtues of a product. He was the one to inaugurate the notion that to sell anything from a brand to a public figure, it was best to link it to people's deepest desires and fears. Bernays wrote, "People are seldom aware of the real reasons for their conduct. We are governed by our minds are shaped, our tastes shaped, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of." Bernays understood that there was a link between culture and consumption that could be taken advantage of. He worked insidiously so that the public received propaganda messages without suspecting it. For example, Bernays was a forerunner of indirect advertising in movies. During his long and famous campaign for Lucky Strike, he repeatedly got movie stars to smoke in their films. The first sector that Bernays helped was car manufacturers, which had a new problem. Everyone who could afford a car in the United States had already bought one. Stock was piling up, and factories risked being shuttered. Bernays' solution was to rebrand cars as symbols of male vitality. He told his client, General Motors, to launch new models every year, bigger, faster, and cars that are much more luxurious. Henry Ford, who had sold 50% of all cars in the world at that particular point, hated this tactic, later coined planned obsolescence. Ford had a good point. We can see its effects everywhere today, from mobile phones to fast fashion. It's incredible to think that people are drawn to the new Apple phones, which are now version 16, but they just make minor improvements each year to attract new customers or have the old customers move from their old phone to the new one. Talking of fashion, Bernays organized shows at new department stores to promote clothes, not as protection against the elements, but as statements of social class. This approach soon spread to other products, helped by another of his inventions, product placement. Bernays was also the first to use what we would now call a flash mob. In 1929, he paid women in New York's Easter Parade to all suddenly start smoking, which was a big taboo at the time. It was presented as a spontaneous protest, but was orchestrated by Bernays and his client Lucky Strike. They rebranded cigarettes as freedom torches, not the habit of immoral women. Later, Lucky Strike noticed that women were choosing competing brands. Bernays traced the low sales to the forest green packaging, an unpopular color at the time. Lucky Strike wouldn't change the color, so Bernays changed public perception instead. He organized a green ball full of glittering celebrities in aspirational green designs. This was at the Waldorf Astoria. Academics and business leaders were invited to speak about the benefits of green, real or contrived. Bernays and Lucky Strike kept totally out of view, making the green ball, like the smoking protest, appear spontaneous. We have all heard the saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But not many know that the man behind that piece of common wisdom is again Bernays. It all started because in the 1920s, the Beech nut packing company was struggling to sell one of its most important meat products, bacon. Instead of lowering the price, Bernays decided to dig deeper. Bernays enlisted the help of his doctor to promote breakfast as the most important meal of the day. Using reasoning now known to be false, he convinced the doctor to write to 5,000 others, asking if they agreed. 4,500 wrote back, giving Bernays the expert ammunition he needed. Until then, Americans ate a light breakfast of coffee, juice, and maybe some toast. Bernays got the doctors to sign a statement agreeing that a large protein-rich breakfast, for example bacon and eggs, was healthier than a light one. The petition was published in the newspapers and had a huge impact on American society. From then on, a breakfast that did not include bacon and eggs was considered poor. Bacon sales skyrocketed, and Bernays fulfilled his mission. He engineered a need that did not previously exist, and as a byproduct, he created the famous American breakfast. Bernays used the same techniques on children. To convince kids that bathing could be fun, he sponsored soap sculpture competitions and floating contests. These were designed to prove that ivory bars, a product of Procter Gamble, were more buoyant than competing products. Another example of his genius was in World War II. They saw the rise of instant preparations. As people had less time to cook, the industry began to design dry ingredient formulas that only required water to prepare. Instant cake mixes were pioneers in this field. Despite being so convenient, they weren't selling. Disappointed and confused by poor sales, Betty Crocker, brand executives turned to Edward Bernays marketing for help. Once again, Bernays used basic psychology to solve this problem. After conducting a focus group aimed at housewives, he came to the conclusion that they felt an unconscious guilt for using a product that required so little effort. The answer? Give them a greater sense of involvement by requiring them to add an egg to the mix. Sales skyrocketed when the symbolic egg had its effect on the collective unconscious and removed the barrier of guilt. Today, we might call Bernays pioneered a form of branding, but at its core, it represents little more than a particularly brazen set of techniques to manipulate people to get them to do your bidding. Its underlying purpose in large part is to make money by convincing people that they want something they do not need. Bernays sought to turn citizens and neighbors into consumers who use their purchasing power to propel themselves down the road to happiness. Without a moral compass, however, such a transformation promotes a patronizing and ultimately cynical view of human nature and human possibilities. One is likely to destroy lives as to build them up. That's pretty much the gist of it. A very interesting man, and what an impact he's had on all of us. So thank you very much for listening, and until the next time, I bid you farewell.